So let's begin with prayers, offering prayers to the Supreme Lord and the Guru Parampara so that we can gain access to this divine knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So, yes, Gopinath, how are you today joining the podcast as a host?
So it has been a dream of mine to to host this podcast someday. So I'm very grateful and very honored that this situation and Rasikraman Prabhu is allowing me to ask questions to you in this public forum in this format.
Thanks, Gopinath, and you are capable of very, very tough intellectual questions. So I'll have to tighten my seatbelt also. So before we go into the questions, I would like to give a brief summary of what this 13th chapter is all about. And as we had posted on the group, that Bhagavad Gita has a triad of karma, bhakti, and jnana. So Chakravarti Thakur, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur calls Bhagavad Gita as a jewel box. Now, if you look at a jewel box, it has a lid at the top and it has a case at the bottom. But in between is something which is the most valuable, is the jewel. But the lid and the case, they help to store and preserve that jewel. So that's the comparison that he draws, saying that the first 6 chapters are the lid of the Gita, which help you open up and reach to the jewel, that is Bhakti Yoga. So the first 6 chapters speak about Nishkam Karma Yoga, Sakam Karma Yoga, and to some extent also about Jnana Yoga and Dhyana Yoga, but primarily those 6 chapters are directed towards Karma Yoga. So that's the lid. And the case at the bottom is Jnana Yoga, which helps to hold that Bhakti. Because without knowledge, Bhakti may become an avenue for expression of one's whimsical sentiments. So Srila Prabhupada would say, religion without philosophy is sentimentalism, and philosophy without religion is dry speculation. Right? So we need a blend of bhakti and jnana. So jnana helps hold the bhakti. Otherwise, without knowledge, our bhakti may be whimsical. So having gone through the lid, the first 6 chapters, and the jewel that we have been able to behold in the last 6 chapters from the 7th to the 12th, now we are on the 3rd section of the triad, which is the Jnana Yoga. So are you all geared up to navigate into this leg of our journey of the Gita? If yes, please spit out in the chat boxes your emotions, your feelings. So yes, all of us are prepared and excited for venturing into this Jnana Yoga section of the Gita, and which is very important. If you look at any book, especially those thick books, which are technical books about a subject, there's a very important section at the end of the book. Gopinath, would you like to give example of a terse book on economics? or finance which is so difficult to understand that even the words and terminology.
Yes, there's a book written by Lord John Maynard Keynes. It's his work, which is called A Theory on Employment, Interest, and Income. His general theory on employment, interest, and income.
Mhm.
Uh,
Wow, that's what the whole world is running after: employment, interest, and income. And there's a general theory about all of that. So, how thick is the book?
I think it's I think he is. It is said that he went through so many iterations of it on to make the book more articulate. It was I think the initial document must be at least 1,800 pages, and it was shortened to around 800. And the reason was, I think it was World War II, where
Paper was in shortage. Okay, so now have you ever held the book in your hands and
yes, I have.
okay, and also opened and read it?
I have tried to open and read it.
Okay, or you might be using it as substitute for dumbbells.
Yes, bro.
Okay. Anyhow, the point I'm trying to make is sometimes these books have such complex terminologies and concepts which are not clear to us. So these books always have a section at the end which is called the appendix, right? Appendix which clarifies some of the very tough concepts presented. Without understanding of those concepts, the 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 whole framework and the theory might not be accessible, right? So there are a lot of appendices which are attached to the main text, main manuscript, and there's a glossary of terms, which term is used and what does that term actually mean. Without understanding that term, we may read it and not be able to process it in its proper context. So these last 6 chapters is a kind of an appendix or a glossary of the terms which were used all through those 12 chapters. So in case you have not been able to understand some of the concepts of the Gita so far, starting from chapter 1, here is another opportunity where the concepts which will be explained in a very lucid fashion. And so in case you are a beginner, these 6 chapters are especially relevant. Does that increase our appetite? Yeah, great. So let us first take a brief bird's eye view into this chapter, the 13th chapter. And what I'm going to do, I'll try and so I have made a 2-page summary. I'll just try and share the screen if that helps. So this is a summary. I'm sure everyone can see the screen. Yeah. Yes, Gopinath, it's visible. So this chapter begins with an inquiry from Arjuna about Kshetra, Kshetragya, and Jnana. Kshetra means the field, Kshetragya means knower of the field, and knowledge. Basically, that is a categorization in which you can break the entire world down. The world is comprised of Kshetra, Kshetragya, and Jnana. And he's asking Krishna about the nature of these three: Kshetra, Kshetragya, and Jnana. We'll go into much more detail as we discuss. So he asks this, and Krishna, in the response, he says that this body, the body which we possess, is a Kshetra. Kshetragya is the Atman, the Jiva, who is the knower of the field, Kshetragya, right? And Jnana refers to knowledge of the field and the knower of the field. Now there are two knowers of the field: the Jiva, the soul, the Atma, and the super soul, the Paramatma. So the Upanishads, they describe that this, on the tree of samsara, these two birds are sitting. On the tree of the body, these two birds are sitting. One bird is trying to enjoy the bitter and sweet fruits of happiness and sorrow, and another bird is just watching. That's the super soul. And so basically, this is the inquiry of Arjuna, and Krishna gives a brief description, and then Krishna says, "Don't worry, I am going to explain to you all of this in much more detail." What does Kshetra mean? Kshetra, basically, this universe is also a Kshetra. Just like we have our body and we are conscious of what is happening within our body, isn't it? If there is a tingling sensation in your finger, if there's a pain in your stomach, if there is some irritation in your eye, you are conscious of what's happening within what is like in your body, in the field of your body. Now this universe is considered as, is not considered, it's the body of the Lord. The Lord expands through his energy this entire material universe, and so we might be just conscious of this body, but super soul, the Paramatma, God, is conscious of the entire universe, because the universe is his body. The mountains are his bones, the ocean is his navel, the rivers are like the veins. So like this, there are descriptions, the trees are like hairs. So like this, there are descriptions in the scriptures to describe the Virat Rupa of the Lord. And so that's the Kshetra of the Lord, the entire universe. And therefore, we might consciously make movements of certain limbs of our body, right? I can move my hand because I have conscious control over it. Now, did we ever wonder how is it that the sun rises at the scheduled time, sets at a scheduled time, the seasons change as per schedule? Who or what makes everything function by the precise laws? Because who is consciously behind all that? Just like in the movements of our body, we are active. So in the movements that we see in the universe, the Lord is consciously active. So Krishna tells that I'm going to explain to you all of that in detail. What are the constituent or blocks of building blocks of this entire Kshetra, not just our individual body, but the entire universe, and the transformations, that how this Kshetra produces desire, hatred, happiness, distress, all of this thing, consciousness, determination. Krishna says, I will explain to you. And then Krishna says, Jnana. From the 8th to 12th verse, Krishna begins with, I have told you that you can learn all of these things from me. Kshetra, Kshetragya, everything you can learn. But there is a certain process that you need to follow. Process to acquire knowledge. So process of acquiring knowledge is not just consuming a book or consuming feeds on through Wikipedia, right, and other sources of information. Krishna says knowledge is not so binary and mechanical. Knowledge is connected to consciousness. So if you want to reach to higher realms of consciousness, higher realms of knowledge, you need to have higher realms of consciousness. And therefore, the process of knowledge is not a mechanical one. Process of knowledge is a spiritual one, where the more you uplift your consciousness, the more finer your perception and knowledge becomes. And so Krishna says, if you want to acquire knowledge, these are the things that you need to work on. Sadachar, your demeanor, which Krishna tells, humility and pridelessness, they will help you acquire knowledge. And this is a universal principle. Vidya dadati vinayam. Vidya leads to Vinay, and Vinay leads to Vidya. If someone is arrogant and proud, they are not in the state of mind to learn. But if someone is humble, they can absorb maximum amount of knowledge. Non-violence, simplicity, cleanliness, these are the conduct, sadachar, which help one acquire shasan, discipline. A student is called shishya. Hmm? A shishya is someone who is under shasan, because they come from the same dhatu shish. The shasan and shishya, and even shastra, which basically means to control. So there has to be control of senses, mind, and ego. There has to be giving up of attachment and absorption in material possessions. Then there's knowledge. Then Krishna says, just sadachara and shasana are not enough. You also need sadhana or devotion, which means you need to have spiritual practices which will uplift your consciousness. You need acharya upasanam, worshipping the teacher, serving the teacher, and maicha ananya yogena bhaktim avyabhicharini, worshipping the Lord with unmotivated devotion. And then finally, you need swadhyaya or deliberation. Having done all the above, now you are ready for actually consuming knowledge. The steps before help you get the right digestion for getting knowledge. Right? Once you get that digestion, then you can ingest knowledge. And this swadhyaya is about ingesting that knowledge. Janma mrityu jara vyadhi dukkha doshanu darshanam, seeing this body as a source of misery and not as a source of enjoyment. And vivikta desha sevitvam, there has to be some sort of solitude where you contemplate and introspect, and deliberation on the nature of Atma, deliberation on the meaning of scriptures. So this is what has been explained as the process of knowledge. And then Krishna talks about the object of knowledge, the Gyeya, which is the Kshetra and the Kshetragya. Especially the Kshetragya has been described, in which Krishna described the Atma and the Paramatma, the features of the Atma and the Paramatma. And then Krishna also talks about, he has now explained the Kshetra, which is the Prakriti, and Kshetragya, which include the Jiva and the Ishwar. Now Krishna is going to talk about the interactions among all of these three. The permutation and combination of interactions among Kshetra and Kshetragya is what Krishna is going to talk about in the 19th to 24th verse, 23rd verse. And then Krishna says that how can one attain this vision of Paramatma? He describes some processes. And then finally he says, someone who has attained this vision of Kshetra and Kshetragya, what does he or she see in this world? So that is described in the last 7-8 verses, from the 27th to 34th. Right? So this is a brief synopsis of what we are going to encounter in this chapter 13. Yes, over to you, Gopinath. How do you find this chapter? Does it open up some new discoveries for you?
Thank you for that summary, Prabhu. New discoveries, as you said, that to digest any discovery or to reflect on any knowledge, you need to start from step one. So I must you must pass the kindergarten to go to the first standard. So as of now, I've not passed the kindergarten stage yet to have the prerequisite to properly reflect on this information. But as such, I found it to be of great spiritual purpose and use, that the way you've summarized it.
Thank you. So now you are, I think, all ready to ask your questions for this 13th chapter.
Okay, Prabhu. So the first question is whether it's many of the great, very thoughtful atheistic thinkers of our time, or may it be the way many men lead their lives today, it's on that prerequisite foundation that there is no God, and that our consciousness is a phenomena that is produced by our brain.
Mhm.
So if this phenomena of our neurons being linked and producing this consciousness is produced by our brain, then what is the source of this consciousness, and what does the spiritual wisdom of the Gita have to say about this?
Okay, so this question is, for your information, is one of the 125 unresolved questions which the Science magazine has presented in its like list a few years ago, that science has not yet unlocked these 125 questions, and this is, by the way, number 2 question in that list of 125. So thank you for asking such a tough question. So let us see if we can resolve this. So the question is essentially that, does the brain produce consciousness? Hmm? Or the consciousness is independent of the brain? Hmm? Is consciousness, desires, emotions, are all of these just complex epiphenomena or a resultant phenomena of all the neuronal activity that is going on within our brain? So now it's very interesting that right now, as we are discussing, this 1300-gram organ that sits here, right, and which is, the size of less than the size of your palm. So that 1300-gram organ, which has approximately 100 billion neurons, is now thinking about itself, right, and trying to understand itself, right. Now the question I would ask you, Gopinath, you can see me? Yes. Can you see the green kurta you are wearing?
Yes.
Yeah, you're wearing the green kurta. Okay, great. So there are a lot of things you can see. You can see your hand. You can see the wall in front of you. You can see the laptop. Everything you can see. But can you see your eyes with your eyes? Let your eye see itself.
No, I cannot.
Unless you have a mirror, but that's not what we are talking of.
Yes.
The eye in itself being self-sufficient to look at itself. So when you are proposing that, let's understand with the brain, that is the brain producing consciousness. Well, how is it possible to see the eye with the eye, right? You need an observer, which is completely distinct and separate from the observed. The seer and seen are different, right? So we are thinking whether brain is responsible for consciousness, or is the consciousness responsible for the brain, for activating the brain? So that's the question. And I gave you the hint that you cannot see the eye with the eye, and you cannot understand the brain, just by some brain processing. There is an observer which is different from the brain, which is now delving on this question, right? The fact that we are delving on this question is a proof that the observer is separate from the brain, who is understanding whether this brain, which is using the brain to understand that whether the consciousness is responsible for the brain, or is the brain responsible for the consciousness. Yeah. So have I made it a little tangled, a little bit tangled, or does the logic make some sense?
So you are saying that the ability to have that degree of self-awareness in introspection is a argument for saying that consciousness cannot be a product of the brain, but rather that we have got that causal chain wrong.
Yeah, so to put it uh, simply, that the fact that we are asking this question means that there's an observer which is looking at the brain. There's an observer outside the brain which is trying to look at the brain, right? And which is separate, distinct from the brain. Now, brain is like a processor, a computing processor, which does wonderful tasks for us, which helps us process maths, which helps us process the world around us, the people we talk to. It helps us up. It helps us process a number of things, but it's a processor which is being used by a user, right? Just like you have a computer processor, so the computer CPU is a unit which is outside, and you use it to process to process maths. But then you are the one who are actuating the use of that computer. So similarly, the brain is a processor sitting right here, which is being used by the soul. And this is what Krishna says: the kshetra and the kshetragya are different. The brain is a kshetra, which is a processing unit, just as our hand is is a kshetra which has a certain function. The hand is a function of uh, manipulating things, holding things, hmm, writing, etc. The hand has a function, but I use my hand for its functions. So our gut it has some functions of digestion. So I use my gut for digestion, right? Because that's the function it can do. Now the brain is a processor, and I use my brain for processing information and world around me, right? So the I who is processing is separate from the processor, right? So that's a very brief glimpse into it. And consciousness is a very fundamental phenomena. And when we talk of fundamental phenomena, space and time are fundamental phenomena. You don't go asking around ki, does the space exist or does time exist. These are fundamental phenomena, and you know the entire scientific theory develops based on space and time, the dimensions. Now consciousness is a dimension which is even more fundamental than space and time, because unless you observe, there's no space and time. Like, you need an observer of the space and time, and that's what the quantum theory, if you go into the quantum theory, we realize that like this is one of there's this quantum mechanics has revealed that one of the most perplexing aspects is that tiny subatomical particles don't seem to choose a state unless there is an observer who measures it. So that's a lot of complex stuff for us to process, but basically quantum mechanics says that you cannot remove the dimension of observer. It's as fundamental and even more fundamental than space and time. So basically brain is not a substitute for the observer, right? And now let's try to understand what we do and what does the brain do. I'll give you a simple example. You have seen a rose flower, right? Now when you see a rose flower at the lotus feet of Shri Radha Gopinath, what are the things that are going on in your mind? Okay, I think you have a painting or a photo of the Lord.
Yes, Prabhu. I have a photo.
So what are the emotions that go through when you look at a rose? Or say a lover looks at a rose which he wants to offer to the beloved.
Yeah, it immediately you feel a great sense of love and a great sense of affection, and a great sense of devotion, a strong attraction towards.
Mhm. Okay. So now this is what happens when you see the rose. But now let's take the mechanistic route of what happens when you see the rose, when we are talking of uh, the phenomena of biology. When we are looking at the rose, anyone is looking at the rose, please pardon me if it is a bit technical, but um, this will help us understand and appreciate that. Okay, Dr. Anupriya Sawant, she might be happy with the discussion, because doctors are anyway studying these phenomena in detail. Uh, so we are taking a philosophical route of trying to see whether the conscious experience of looking at a rose, uh, whether it connects to or tables with the mechanistic phenomena of looking at an object. So when we are looking at a rose, what is happening is wavelengths, light photons of certain wavelength and frequency, they enter the aperture, the pupil of our eye, right? And then they fall on the retina. Now, the retina is the screen of the eye, which has a number of photoreceptors, which are in the form of cubes and in the form of cones and rods, right? A number of photoreceptors, which are in the form of cones and rods. And these photoreceptors, once this light of certain frequencies, they fall on that retina, these photoreceptors, they stimulate certain neurochemical reactions, right? So so basically certain neurochemical activity takes place, and this neurochemical activity is transferred through the optic nerve. There are certain optic nerves. These optic nerves take all of that neurochemical activity into the area of the brain which is responsible for sight, the visual cortex. And this visual cortex is present in this occipital lobe of the brain. And once it reaches that visual cortex, what happens is that it activates certain nerve cells, which then process that electrochemical impulse in those through those neurons to grasp the shape, the size, the color gradients of what you see. When you're looking at a rose, those photons, they when they go in through the pupil, through the retina, and through the optic fibers into the visual cortex, the nerve cells there, they translate it to understand, to actually replicate the shape, size, and the color textures, right? And that's the process of sight. Now, when I explained all of that to you, did I talk of, or did it evoke any emotions? It's just a mechanistic process, isn't it?
Yes.
Right? So the question arises, but we had the conscious experience with emotions of looking at a rose, isn't it? So where did that conscious experience come from? Was it in the nerve fibers? Like when there are complex things, it's always better to break them down. We are looking for where does this conscious experience come from. So it has to be there somewhere in this entire chain, right from the pupil, retina, those rods and cones, to the optic fibers, to the visual cortex. Somewhere was that conscious experience present in the nerve cells, which are just made up of atoms and molecules? Was that conscious experience present in the potassium ions, sodium potassium ions? Was that conscious experience present in the the current gradient, the voltage gradient, right? And the microcurrents flowing through those voltage gradients. So there's conscious experience doesn't exist in the currents. You see wires which transmit current. This is micro volt, microvolts, nanovolts. The current that flows is, in kilovolts and megavolts, but there is no conscious experience there. We have sodium and potassium everywhere available, but there is no conscious experience there. So where does this conscious experience come? We don't find that anywhere in this entire chain. So it must be coming from a source which is outside this entire framework. So it is saying that consciousness comes from the brain or life comes from molecules is like saying time comes from clocks. Does time come from clocks? Clocks can express time. Clocks can represent time, but clocks don't create time, right? So similarly, the brain can express consciousness, or it can be a conduit, which actually, has the consciousness flowing through it. But brain doesn't create consciousness. Consciousness is a fundamental phenomena which exists on its own, right? And which is not very difficult to understand. But then the question, the devil's advocate, the question may be asked that, well, we have seen that if someone goes through dementia or some sort of a cerebral disease, their consciousness is impaired. Their ability to see, understand things is debilitated, which means that consciousness is dependent on the brain, isn't it? Or if someone takes some mind altering chemicals such as alcohol or drugs, it affects your consciousness, isn't it? If you take anesthesia, right, which affects the brain, then basically you are no longer conscious of the hand, right? Which definitely means that there is a dependence. But a dependence is like the eye is dependent on the glass. What I see, I'm wearing a particular glass. So does this glass see things on its own? Does this lens see things on its own? If I leave this lens somewhere, just can this lens get me to see things? No. This lens is just a medium through which my eye sees things. So similarly, brain is just a medium through which the consciousness experiences the world. The brain calculates and processes the world around and just acts as the via media for the interface for the consciousness, for the conscious being, the Atma, to interface and interact with the world around, right? And if my glasses are tainted, if my glasses are painted with black soot, will I be able to see anything? Is it because my eyes are not existing? My eyes are still functional and existing, but the glasses which the eyes have worn have been painted black, so they are not able to see anything. So when someone is going through dementia or Alzheimer's, the glass has been painted. They can't see things clearly, right? And the more the evolved one's consciousness becomes, right, one can actually transcend this glass, this filter of the brain, and experience higher states of reality, which because this brain is like a valve which lets only certain experience to pass through, right? So as one evolves spiritually through spiritual practices, then one can transcend the brain. And actually there are a lot of researches and studies which show that that people there's a particular scientist, actually he was a pediatrician. His name is John Lorber. He did decades of study, and he documented 600 scans of people with brain disorders, and these included people with nearly normal brains with 50 to 70% of the cranium or the brain being filled with cerebrospinal fluid, which means they didn't have, 50 to 70% of the gray matter which generally people have. And then people with 70 to 90% of cranium filled with cerebrospinal fluid, and people with 95% of the cranium being filled with cerebrospinal fluid, which means they just had 5% of gray matter or less than that. And he studied such people, and he found that among this group with 95% or more of dysfunctional brain, he found that 50% of them had normal IQs. And in fact, there was a student with an IQ of 126, which is way higher than normal, which is actually brilliant, who had less than 95%, less than 5% of the gray matter, rather than having a 4.5 centimeter thickness of the brain tissue. He just had a millimeter of it, which means that the consciousness expresses itself through the brain, but is not dependent on the brain. So we saw it from different perspectives, and we can actually, from this discussion, with that the observer has to be different from the observed. You cannot see the eye with the eye, right? The fact that we are discussing this question means that there's an observer which is looking at the brain. And we also discussed that how the experience of feelings and emotions and desires is something which is not accounted by any of the mechanistic phenomena of what we discussed when you see a rose, right? Which means that there is a certain consciousness as an independent existence. And then we also saw that there are researches done on people with damaged brain, and still they are functional. So yes, and Krishna is saying that the Kshetra and Kshetragya are different. The body and the knower of the body is different. There's an Atma who is a different dimension from the physical matter that we actually see around. So Gopinath, this is a long answer to your short question. How does everyone take it? Is it does it make some sense? Is it clear, or was it too difficult to understand? And type it out in the chat boxes. What do you think, Gopinath?
I think certainly very comprehensive. I think a great disability, even among students or even among those who at least have the consciousness, pun intended, to ask these questions, is that the world now at least dictates that if something must be true and we must act according to that truth, it should be peer reviewed and you have to show it to me in a laboratory. And that disability, that filter is what sort of draws the line for many people. That if you cannot show it to me in a laboratory, then how is it that it can be true? And I think the way you've comprehensively tried to answer the question gives a lot of solace to that type of doubt seeker.
So as honestly, Rajaramji and is saying that too difficult to realize or visualize. So no doubt that this is number 2 on the top 125 questions which have still not been answered by science. So it might be a little difficult, but even if we are just able to appreciate that consciousness is different from this neuronal activity in the brain, it can actually give us a lot of faith in the spiritual sciences and the practices that we follow, because we are not just restricted or limited to the matter which constitutes us, right, in the form of the body. So yeah, we will all discuss this further. You know, we'll take the questions, follow-up questions in the end. And so if you have one more question, Gopinath, we can take that, and then we will delve into follow-up questions.
Okay, Prabhu. Thank you very much. My second question is that we live in a world today where everyone from undergraduates to people who are working for companies are dealing with these two alphabets, which is AI, and many smart, thoughtful persons, many ambitious persons across the world are aligning themselves to declare or create what they call AGI, which is artificial general intelligence. So the scientific knowledge today is so much more evolved than what it was during the times of the telegram or the times of the spinning jenny in the 1800s. We have come so far, and people believe that science has still the ability to ask these questions and resolve them, even the more fundamental questions of life. But we still see that even in this science or scientism, none of the problems of corruption, of crime, of violence, of depression have really been solved. So, is our pursuit of knowledge, which has been now showed through science, missing something very important?
So the question is essentially that we have in recorded history seen an evolution and growth in scientific knowledge, the way we have defined it to be. I'm giving certain qualifiers. We have seen an evolution and growth in scientific knowledge, the way we have defined it to be, what science is. And then we see there's an evolution and growth, no doubt about it. And as there is growth and evolution, there is also hope that we might be able to very soon unravel those deep secrets and mysteries of the universe, from creation to origins of life, and whatnot. Right, all of these secrets, we are going to get them revealed. So on one hand, there is this hope, and on the other hand, there's a despair that despite all of this evolution, the problems in the society which hurt the most are not exactly whether we understand the origins of life or not. The problems which hurt are what we do with the life that we have, and that is the rampant corruption, crime, violence, which is on a greater, I would say, exponential growth, even faster than what science and technology are growing, is the misuse of science, technology, and human faculty for violence, crime, and social injustices, etc., etc. So, and then result in depression and other evils of the society, ills of the society. So, are we somewhere flawed in our pursuit of knowledge? Knowledge, as we understand it, one sense gives us a sense of progress, another sense gives us a sense of despair of what's happening with the knowledge that we have. So here Krishna comes to a rescue, because Krishna describes what knowledge is. In this chapter, let me read out the verse to you. It's actually a treat to understand and see the world from the Gita's eyes, from Krishna's eyes. And then we realize that certain very simple things we just miss it out because of certain biases and prejudices that we have. In the third verse of the 13th chapter, Krishna says, Kshetra Kshetragyayor Jnanam Yattad Jnanam Matam Mama. What he's saying is, to understand Kshetra and Kshetragya, to understand the body and its knower, is called knowledge. This is my opinion. So what is the definition of knowledge as per Krishna? Knowledge of the field and the knower of the field. But what is the definition of knowledge that we have with modern science? Knowledge of the Kshetra. Knowledge of the world around is knowledge, right? But we didn't factor in knowledge of the Kshetragya, knowledge of the knower, right? We have just been uh, going deeper into drilling into the mechanisms and the functions of of the microcosm to the macrocosm in terms of matter, right? We have gone from outer space to the space within atoms, right? What's happening there? But it's all the field. A very principal and very important fundamental aspect of knowledge is the knower of the field, the Atma, which we have missed out. And Prabhupada often say that Prabhupada would say, I have gone to so many universities in the world, the Oxford University, the Harvard University, the MIT University, and at MIT, Prabhupada said, but where is the department? You have so many departments. Department of Maths, Department of Biology, Department of Commerce, Department of Economics. But where is the department of spiritual knowledge? Where is the department of the knower of all of these departments? The soul. That's missing. And that Krishna says, without excluding that knowledge of the soul, your knowledge will always remain incomplete. And even if we honestly look at our discovery and evolution of the knowledge of the macrocosmic and the microcosmic world, essentially what we have discovered is we have been able to know more and more about less and less. First, there was just graduation. Then there came specialization. Then there came super specialization. Then there's super specialization. The more you go into a particular field of knowledge, you realize, if you're honest and open-minded, you will not realize that how much is it that I know. What we'll realize is how little of this entire universe of knowledge that I know. If someone becomes studies biology, they will after 3 years of studying biology, they will think that I know so much about biology. But ask someone who is studying cell biology of a cell, they will say, Arey, till the time I was studying plain biology, I thought I know so much. But when I started studying the cell biology, I realized that there is a complete universe within this cell. How much of the biology I didn't know. So if you're honest and open, you will not realize that how much I know. You realize how little I know. How little and little of more and more, that we know with this advancement of knowledge. So rather than understanding how close we are to the truth, we will understand how far away we are from the truth. And that open, curious mindset will help us, take a look within. Because the universe outside is so vast and abstract to understand. Let me understand a universe within. That is the Atma, the soul, the consciousness. And that Krishna is saying that unless you understand that, your pursuit of just the knowledge of the field, the world working around, will be futile and incomplete. Is not going to lead you anywhere, right? Because without a frame of reference, you cannot have any observation. Right? An observation requires an observer. And that's what Krishna is saying. Knowledge is not complete just with the observation. Knowledge also requires the observer. Science begins with observation, then there's hypothesis, then there's experiment, and then there's science, right? So if you do a regression, science comes from experiment comes from hypothesis comes from observation. But where does the observation come from? The observer. Krishna said, you missed it out. You didn't observe the observer, the Atma. And then Krishna gives these 20 points of knowledge, which we discussed in brief, that uh, that the process of knowledge, in order to understand Kshetra and Kshetragya, we need to have these four things in our life. We need to have Sadachar, the right kind of conduct, and which was as described. Sadachar means there has to be humility, pridelessness, non-violence, ahimsa, simplicity, internal and external cleanliness, shocham. So there has to be sadachar, because knowledge is state specific. Without developing a higher state of consciousness, we will not be able to understand these finer aspects. Then we need shasan or discipline, control of mind, senses, and ego. And then we need sadhana, which means regular spiritual practices of chanting and meditation, and studying under a teacher. And then swadhyaya, deliberation, deliberating and introspecting on one's identity. So when we take this 20 points of knowledge, process of knowledge, then we will be able to unravel each of these deeper mysteries of the universe within, and then the universe without will be much more accessible for our understanding, right? Because we will understand the creator of this creation. So in summary, basically, if you just want to get material knowledge, a consciousness at the level of matter or Annamaya Kosh is enough. But if you want to unlock higher levels of knowledge, we need to uplift our consciousness from Annamaya to Pranamaya to Manomaya to Vijnanamaya and ultimately Anandamaya Kosh. And that requires a process, a journey. And once we go through that journey, then all of this makes sense. So yes, Gopinath, there's one simple thing which we need to add: knowledge of the Atma. Okay, so I think we have taken two very terse questions today, and the answers to them also took some time. So we can park your questions for the next session, Gopinath. And meanwhile, if the audience, if they want to ask some questions, they can unmute themselves, or we also have certain questions put up on the chat box. We will take them. But if first someone wants to unmute and ask something, you are free to do so, or share any thoughts and reflections on what we discussed. Yeah.
Vijay?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Vedapriya.
Yes, Vedpriya.
Yeah, so I have a question. So as
Please
you
go
said
ahead.
that there are something which our eyes can see, like our hands and matter, and there are some things which can be detected by machines and tools, like signals and stuff we can't see with our naked eye. So can technology be developed to such an extent in the future one day that we can identify subtle things like the soul and mind, the things which are unanswered by science today? Is that possible?
Okay, so you are saying that in the realm of matter, there are certain things which we can't see with the instruments that we have. We can't see infrared rays. We can't see ultraviolet rays, but they exist. We have certain instruments which can actually perceive them. So in the realm of matter, there are certain things which technology has been able to reach out to, which we cannot with our faculties. So can it so happen that science is able to, or technology is able to develop instruments by which you can peep into the I would call it metaphysical realities, the soul and so forth, right? So yes, you are partially right. You need an instrument to make an observation. certain type of observations are not possible, just as you cannot hear with your eyes. The eyes are not a proper instrument for hearing. The eyes are instrument for seeing, right? And now now ears also, there's only a certain audible range which we can hear. Dogs have a greater range of hearing. There's dog whistle. So for actually accessing any observation, you need the right instrument. That is what is settled and agreeable for everyone, right? So when you talk of spiritual subject matters or metaphysical reality, yes, we fully agree. You need the right kind of instruments. Hmm? But those instruments which can perceive and observe metaphysical reality cannot be material in their makeup. The instruments that are used for looking into metaphysical reality have to be spiritual. Just as you cannot hear with your eyes, so you cannot perceive the soul with material instruments. You need spiritual instruments, and therefore the scripture says, "Atah Shri Krishna namadi na bhavet grahyam indriye sevon mukhe hi jivvado swayam eva suratyada." With blunt material senses, we cannot access and understand the reality of Krishna's name, form, pastimes. Krishna was there on this planet, performing his pastimes. The absolute truth descended on this planet and performed his pastimes. He is right now also present as a super soul within our heart. Our soul also is, sitting next to him, but we can neither see the soul nor the super soul because we are trying to access them with the wrong instruments. So how do we get the right instruments? Sevon mukhe hi jihvado, by spiritualizing our senses. Right now, our spiritual senses have been covered with layers and layers of ignorance and anarthas. So the process of cleansing them through spiritual, all those four things that I talked of, the sadachar, the shasan, the sadhana, and the swadhyay. All of those four things help prepare the right kind of instrument by which you can, in the self-same life, in the self-same body, you can be able to perceive and see Krishna face to face, perceive your Swarup. Everything can happen. But then let us agree to it that we need the right kind of instruments to make the right kind of observations. And for spiritual observations, you need spiritual instruments. And for spiritual instrument, you need a spiritual process or spiritual technology. For material observation, you need material instruments which are made of material technology. So for spiritual observation, you need spiritual instruments made up out of spiritual technology. And that spiritual technology is chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Ram, Hare Hare. So just as this phone is a piece of technology which can communicate with someone far away, this Mahamantra is a technology which can help us to connect with the Supreme Lord, who is Tad Dure Tattu Antike, someone who is the farthest and yet the nearest. But yet we are oblivious of that personality. So does that make sense, Vedapriya?
Yes, Prabhuji, I understood it. Thank you.
Thank you. How are your other friends in Hyderabad?
Yeah, they're fine, Prabhuji. We're all busy with exams this season.
Yes, I remember all of you came to GV for the teenagers camp.
In May.
Yeah.
Yes, Prabhuji. I still remember those days a lot.
Great. Please come again soon.
Yes, Prabhuji, sure. Whenever there's an opportunity.
Thank you. And are there any other questions or reflections anyone would like to share? Okay, so I think we are done for today's session, and very, very grateful to everyone for making it a priority and joining us today and contributing to this discussion, which at least enlivened me and made me to think deeper about the knowledge of the Gita and how does that knowledge of the Gita, uh, connects to the world that we live in and the discourse that is happening in the society and the world we live in. So that that connect is something which we try to make in these discussions in Gita for you, your questions and Gita's answers. And looking forward to yet another session coming week, next week on Saturday, and we'll share the details with you in the next about the next session on the WhatsApp group. Thanks so much for joining, and thank you so much, especially to Gopinath for joining. And actually, it was my dream also to have you to to actually contribute to this discussion. Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you so much.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai.